Welcome aboard, everybody. Dr. Peter Glidden here with you on the 17th day of April 2014 for another live edition of Fire Your MD Now. Now, by the sound of that music, that can only mean one thing. It must be Metaphysical Thursday. I'm very excited about today's guest. I'm going to bring him on up in just a second. First, I need to set the scene. I won't be taking any calls at all for the first hour of the show, as we're going to give full sway to our guest for the entire hour, because there is lots to know. This is our entire position, that you don't know what you don't know, that there is some stuff, quite a bit of stuff, that is so far outside of our conceptual framework that we didn't even know we didn't know that. Now, every Thursday for the next few months, I will be interviewing luminaries from different religions and different spiritual disciplines from all over planet Earth to bring to you, my listening audience, their unique perspective on the soul, the spirit, and the relationship thereof to the human body. Because as Shakespeare so aptly put, there are many things, Horatio, in heaven and earth which are beyond your ken. And so it is here on Metaphysical Thursday. Today, we're interviewing Marshal Govindan, also known as Satchidananda. He's a disciple of Babaji Nagaraj, the famed Himalayan master made famous in Paramahansa Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi. He's the originator of Kriya Yoga, Babaji Nagaraj, and Satchidananda, our guest, is also a disciple of Yogi S.A.A. Ramaya. Satchidananda has practiced Babaji's Kriya Yoga intensively since 1969, including 5 years in India, and in my humble opinion, Satchidananda is an unrivaled spokesman for authentic Indian yogic philosophy. That you would be hard-pressed to find anybody alive on planet Earth now who has a greater depth, breadth, and personal understanding of yoga philosophy than my guest today. For more than 25 years, he's researched and published the writings of the Yoga Siddhas. He's the author of the best-selling book Babaji and the 18 Siddha Kriya Yoga tradition, which is now published in 15 languages. He's also the author of the first international English translation of the Tirumundaram, a classic of yoga and tantra, Kriya Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and the Siddhas, and the Wisdom of Jesus and the Yoga Siddhas. Since the year 2000, Satchidananda has sponsored and directed a team of scholars in India in a large-scale research project engaged in the preservation, transcription, translation, and the publication of the whole of the literature related to the yoga of the 18 Siddhas, which is a gargantuan, monumental, unbelievably complex feat, as most of the works that they're translating were written hundreds of years ago on palm leaf manuscripts. Our guest is also the founder of a lay order of Kriya Yoga teachers with 28 members in a dozen countries. He directs the activities of yoga ashram retreat centers in Quebec, India, and Sri Lanka, and those of registered charities in these countries which are dedicated to the research and education of Babaji's Kriya Yoga. He's a graduate of Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and my privilege to introduce to you Satchidananda. Welcome aboard.
Hello, Peter. Thank you for your kind introduction. I'm happy to be able to speak about something which is close to my heart.
So let's hit the ground running, why don't we? The type of yoga and the spiritual discipline that you are versed in is called Siddhanta. Can you give us a brief understanding of what that's all about?
Yeah, the word Siddhanta comes from two words. The word Siddha, which means perfection, and Anta, which means final end. So it's referring also, the word Siddha, to a master of yoga who's arrived at a certain degree of perfection, or a certain area of perfection in his life. So this body of works or their literature teachings is referred to as Siddhanta. It's an open philosophy. There is no real dogma or, you might say, philosophical commonality between the teachings. What does characterize it, however, is the emphasis on the practice of what they call Kundalini Yoga to bring about a change in one's perspective, one's capacity for realizing the truth of things, and that basically is their ultimate authority, one's own experience, which is gained, I'd say, a mystic state of consciousness.
That's one of the things that drew me into this line of spirituality to begin with, was the emphasis here on personal experience, the emphasis on personal experience rather than on interpretation of Scripture, which harkens back to one of the Buddhist aphorisms that in the teachings of some of the sects of Buddhism, they say, if you ever meet Buddha on the road, kill him. The meaning there being that you shouldn't believe anybody else's interpretation of God other than your own direct personal experience. Now, the Siddha tradition existed about how many years ago in southern India?
Well, it began probably about 1,800 years ago, and it reached its peak about 800 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and it has had prominent members since that time, and it still continues, although it's in a much, it's still in some areas, especially in South India, but it's really a pan-Indian phenomena. We even find siddhas in the Tibetan tradition.
That's fascinating. Now, what does Siddhanta tell us about the soul and its relationship to the body?
The soul would probably be described as being, consciousness, and bliss. It's not a thing. It's not an object. It's the subject. It's what we feel within ourselves when we are in a state of calmness, and it's that part of us which is basically standing back as a witness towards not only what's going on outside of ourselves, which we see and hear and smell and taste and touch, but also that part of us which can witness our own thoughts, our own emotions, and which is really not affected by them, which is really in a state of being without desire, without any reaction to what's going on. We usually don't encounter it very often because our consciousness, which is the second part of this definition of soul, our consciousness is generally absorbed by the experiences, you might say by the television show of our life. And to give you an analogy, when you're sitting in front of the television watching a program, your consciousness gets absorbed in the drama on the screen. And it's only when you really maybe take several steps back and watch yourself watching the television that you begin to notice what is noticing. That is, becoming conscious of what is consciousness, okay? So I'm making a distinction here between consciousness, which is that power to apprehend, to witness, to see, and everything else. So this goes back to the fundamental principle behind yoga and the Siddhanta teachings of what we call two principles, the subject and the object, the seer and the seen. Generally, in the West, we've done so much to explore nature in our universities, and all our bodies of knowledge are the result of this, a tremendous amount of investigation we've done on the nature of things, everything which can be objectively experienced or measured or seen. Whereas in the East, they have focused their attention on the other side of the coin, on what we call the subject, the seer, consciousness itself. And even today in the West, of course, the idea of consciousness is subject of a lot of investigation. Philosophers and scientists are trying to understand what is the fundamental, you might say, building block of the universe. What is consciousness? It's a mystery, and because it's not an object, it's not something you can measure. And the mystics talk about it, the scientists talk about it. I have a quotation from Einstein who said, "The essence of mysticism is the finest experience. It's the fundamental emotion at the root of science. It may be defined as consummation, an instantaneous, intuitive insight, loaded with the feeling that it is not accessible to common sense, rational training, or learning." So this gets back to the whole idea of mystery. Okay, there's nothing wrong in looking at life as a mystery. We always want answers, but the answers themselves are like teacups of water that we might use to measure the ocean, right? And trying to measure the ocean up with a teacup, of course, is absurd. You can simply dive into it, you can admire the ocean, you can experience it without having to try to measure it, with your mind. So this is the mystic's approach to the soul. The soul is consciousness, being, and it's blissful. That is, it has an unconditional joy to it, no matter whether it's raining or it's not raining, whether you're having a good experience or an unpleasant experience. There's a part of our fundamental being which is in a state of bliss.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, we jump immediately into the deep end of the pool. Very, very excited about today's interview. Stick around with us. So much more to come with one of the world's leading experts on Siddhanta and the practice of yoga, Marshall Govindan Satchidananda. Don't even think about touching that dial. We'll return shortly. Welcome back, everybody. Dr. Peter Glidden, your steadfast advocate for health, welcoming you to another edition of Metaphysical Thursday, arguably my favorite day of the week. Our guest today, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone more versed in authentic yoga than Satchidananda, who is going to be with us for the next 45 minutes, more or less. And let's basically break it down like this. Conventional Western medicine is grounded in a scientific inquiry, a scientific philosophy referred to as allopathic reductionism. Allopathic reductionism. Reductionism, whether it's in conventional scientific circles or medical circles, argues that if it cannot be measured, it doesn't exist. If it cannot be objectifiably proven, it does not exist. And since no scientific apparatus yet has been able to discover or weigh or discern the presence of the soul or the spirit to the MD, to the practicing allopathic physician, it does not exist. And if it does not exist, it therefore can have no action whatsoever, good or bad, indifferent. It doesn't exist on the action of the human body. Furthermore, reductionism argues that consciousness itself is a fiction and is a fundamental function of biochemistry. Consciousness is a function of biochemistry. This, of course, is a ludicrous supposition from those of us involved in a spiritual inquiry. Who are we? Where do we come from, and where are we going? Arguably the most important questions that we have to ask in our lives are unable to be addressed by Western science. So what do we need to do? This is why religions exist. In order to answer the fundamental questions of life that medical science fails us completely. Now, let's get back into the deep end of the pool here, Satchidananda. So from the Siddhanta point of view, from your yogic discipline's point of view, the soul exists. The soul is a very real thing. Is that correct?
As I said in the previous part of the interview, it's not a thing. That makes it a little bit difficult even to refer to it. But it is this part of us and of everything which sees.
So when the body dies, from your spiritual discipline's point of view, what happens to the soul?
Well, consciousness continues. Consciousness is quantum physics, for example, has been investigating this fundamental building block of the universe, and they finally concluded what the Siddhanta concluded a long time ago, which is that it is conscious energy, and you can't destroy energy. Okay, it just moves into different forms. So, in the tradition of Siddhanta, this consciousness which we have in this particular body, in this particular incarnation, will continue. And depending upon, you might say, the baggage that it has collected in this lifetime, in terms of things that it likes and things it doesn't like, in terms of the consequences of its actions, will take, at some point, another incarnation, another form. Because as long as there's desire, as long as there is what they call a law of karma, that is the law of consequence, the actions will have reactions. Desires must be satisfied. So this is a fundamental teaching of almost all the Eastern traditions.
Now, another of the fundamental teachings of Eastern traditions is something called prana. Let's explain to the listening audience what prana is.
Prana is the life force. It's the other side of the coin. I mentioned that quantum physics and the Siddhas agreed that the fundamental building block of everything, the fundamental essence of everything, is conscious energy. On one side of the coin is consciousness, and the other side of the coin is energy. So we can refer to it as energy, we can refer to it as prana or chi or life force.
Interesting. Now, we're coming up against a hard break here, folks, so stick with me. When we come back from this commercial break, we're going to be talking at length about the relationship between prana and the autonomic processes of the human body. The fundamental position that we bring to the table is the human body is endowed with God-given wisdom, that your body knows how to fix itself, your body wants to fix itself, your body is attempting all of the time to fix itself. And from this particular spiritual discipline's point of view, prana is one of the operative agents in the regulation of the multitudinous autonomic processes in the human body. Stick around. I'm Dr. Peter Glidden, and this is Fire Your MD Now. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Peter Glidden here, your steadfast advocate for health, talking to one of the leading experts in the world of a yogic tradition from southern India called Siddhanta, as part of our Metaphysical Thursday exploration of different world religions, different spiritual disciplines, understanding of the nature of the soul, the nature of consciousness, and its relationship to the human body. Now, if you cut your hand, do you have to tell your immune system how to fix it? Do you have to tell your immune system when to secrete fibrinogen and activate macrophage response time and T helper cell activity? Do you have to do that? No. Your body does it all by itself. When you eat an apple, do you have to tell your stomach how to digest it, your intestinal tract how to absorb it, and your large intestine how to get rid of it? No. It does that all by itself. Now, you would think that if you were involved with the practice of medicine, if you had dedicated your life to the elimination of human suffering through the application of medicine, that you would be interested in understanding the mechanism that does all of the unconscious stuff that happens in the human body. Well, I would be. But sadly, the materialistic-minded MD practicing a Machiavellian, monopolistic type of medicine, known heretofore as allopathic reductionism, does not consider this stuff. They just don't even look at it whatsoever. This is why we have Metaphysical Thursdays, to see if we can't help bring spirituality, bring religious thought down to earth in some type of pragmatic thing we can understand, take a bite out of, and then go chew and cogitate upon it to try to get a handle on this thing that's called life. Now, Satchidananda, from the Siddhanta point of view, how does prana interface with all of this autonomic stuff happening in the human body?
Well, prana moves through our subtle anatomy, what we call the nadis and the chakras, which are channels of pathways of energy and centers of energy. To give you an example, if you're, let's say you ate too much pasta, right? And to give the example you're talking about, normally your intestines would digest it, pass it through, and there'd be no problem. But let's say you've got a lot of stress in your life. Perhaps you ate too much pasta. Perhaps you're on a long trip. So there's a blockage, right? And this blockage is in part created because of stress, tension, worry. So if you were to go to a yoga class, right, you would what would happen? You would relax. And that relaxation would be prompted through what yoga calls the vital body, through the subtle anatomy. And your physical body is actually interpenetrated by the vital body, the seat of your desires and emotions. And the vital body itself is interpenetrated by what's called the mental body, which is the place where you have your sensory experiences, your memories, and that even the mental body is interpenetrated by something even more subtle, which is called the intellectual body, which is where you have your ideas. We form blockages when experiences that we have in life are not let go of, when we dwell on either pleasurable experiences or painful experiences. We all have millions of experiences, but often we dwell on some of them. And if we dwell on them too long, they start to build up and they create an accumulation. And these accumulations are called blockages. So yoga is all about letting go at the intellectual, mental, vital, and then the physical level. In this example, if you went to your yoga class and the teacher told you to now relax, put on some soft music, ask you to maybe breathe, maybe do some exercises for the abdomen, the blockage would be removed not only physically, but first through, you might say, these other bodies, the intellectual, mental, vital, and finally the physical.
And so, as the prana exists, and as the prana moves through the body, it circulates through the body through etheric channels, invisible channels known to the Siddhantans as nadis, which I'm guesstimating are somewhat analogous to the energy meridians that acupuncturists manipulate with their therapeutics. And as the etheric channels in the body become more and more open, when there's less physical stress, less emotional stress, less mental stress, less holding on to of all kinds of things, mental, emotional, animal, spiritual, whatever, that the prana is able to move through the body-mind in an uninhibited way. Yes. And as the prana moves through in an uninhibited way, the body experiences greater and greater levels of health. Am I getting close?
That's right. And it's an intelligent energy. As you indicated, it knows what to do. But it gets blocked. It gets sidetracked when we have, for example, worry, when we're in the habit of dwelling on something which we really should let go of, right? Or when there's even the association of a certain memory of a pleasurable experience that we're saying, oh, I must have that experience again or I can't be happy, right? Then we become unhappy because we don't have the experience. So, right?
Right.
So your soul is in a state of bliss 24 hours a day, but you forget that, imagining, I won't be happy unless I have that ice cream, unless the waiter comes within the next 5 minutes, unless the temperature gets cooler in this room, right? We allow ourselves to get sidetracked by all these hang-ups.
So I guess we could nutshell it into saying that the practice of Siddhanta then becomes an act of remembering who we really are vis-a-vis that we are in fact consciousness itself, which is inhabiting the human body for a certain amount of time, and that our real reality is not the physical body, but the consciousness which is inhabiting it now, the consciousness which entered the human body at the moment of conception, and the consciousness consciousness which will leave the body at the moment of death, that this is our true nature, and that yogic disciplines, the yogic practices brought to the table by the Siddhantan tradition teach living, breathing human beings in a stepwise manner how to do just that, how to remember who we are, which is consciousness itself.
Yeah, I often summarize the practice of yoga as remembering who am I and letting go of the false identification with what I'm not. Your physical body is your vehicle in the physical plane. Your vital body is your vehicle through the world of emotions and desires. Your mental body is a vehicle through the world of sensory experiences. But they're only vehicles. You don't say, I'm a Volkswagen or I'm a Cadillac, right? You have a vehicle. You have a Cadillac or you have a Volkswagen. You have a physical body. It's not unreal, but it's something which transports you through time and space. But the soul transcends time and space. It always is and will always be. You cannot destroy conscious energy.
Fascinating. Now, one thing that I don't want to gloss over here is the fundamental concept, which, when you think about it, it really opens up a number of doors and really is quite a mind bender. That this stuff that's called prana, which is circulating through the body, it's in the environment, it's all around us all the time, is in fact intelligent. Talk a little bit more about that.
From the perspective of Siddhanta, there is only intelligence, consciousness, being, bliss everywhere. It becomes individuated within each living thing, for example, a person. And that doesn't mean that it's you might say, limited in its intelligence, but it means only that our individuality, egoism, tends to get in the way. So egoism is really the big obstacle here. It's the habit of identifying with what you are not, your body, the movements of your mind, the movements of your vital body. But fundamentally, you are the intelligence of the universe. And that's why Einstein could say that the greatest experience is this mystic experience where you have this intuitive flash of insight. And that's how he discovered the theory of relativity, when he had this flash of intuitive insight. And he even had to defend himself from charges of plagiarism. And he said, I never discovered the theory of relativity through a rational intellectual process. It came to me in a flash of insight. So ever since then, scientists have been trying to find out how did he get that insight, right? So it's always there. The source of that intelligence is always there. It's always accessible for each of us, but we keep forgetting it, keep missing it, because we're so identified with the movements through our mind and the movements through our five senses.
Right, and then the materialistically minded, medical professional will take it a step further and try to isolate, a certain part of Einstein's brain, right? That, it must have been that his brain was structured in such and such a way, because again, materialistic science argues that the soul does not exist. It doesn't exist. It's a fiction, and herein lies one of the greatest disconnects, in the world. Well, this is interesting, right? Fortunately,
many scientists have now adopted the point of view of the spiritual people, that consciousness is independent of the brain. If you Google consciousness studies, you'll find this is a raging debate, but there's lots of good arguments for both sides, and it really depends on your perspective,
Well, I would argue that the world of psychiatric medicine, especially here in the United States, has a long, long, long way to go in that regard. But if prana, therefore, is a real, separate, and distinct thing, is it possible to see it?
Well, we see its manifestations in terms of the reflection of what manifests. Like it's at the most subtle level of our apprehension, we can see it as these particles of light floating in the air. Okay, but slowed down light is all the material things around us, whether it's the floor or your shoes or the plate of food in front of you. It's just prana is at a slower rate, a slower vibrational rate. But everything is basically moving as sound in a wave-like manner. And the Siddhas used to say that at the beginning of the universe, before anything was created in form, there was this, the first evoluet, the first thing to, you might say, pop out was sound. And this occurred at a particular point. And everything has come from that. So, to answer your question, mystics, which is the Western word for yogis, experience prana as the light of consciousness within themselves. And we find mystics in all religions talking about the great white light, this inner spiritual experience, which is often the first experience people have of their spiritual being or soul.
Fascinating stuff, ladies and gentlemen. I'm getting goosebumps. I don't know about you. Now, remember, this is Metaphysical Thursday, and I'm going to be interviewing people from all varied different religious and spiritual traditions in the upcoming weeks. I wanted to kick it off today with Satchidananda because Siddhanta is a spiritual discipline that is very, very close to my heart. We'll be finishing out the first hour with Satchidananda. When we come back, don't even think about touching that dial. Finishing out the first hour on Metaphysical Thursday, April 17th, 2014, with Satchidananda. Now, if you'd like more information, the website to go to, babajisKriyayoga.net. That's BABAJISKRIYAYOGA.net. And if that's just too many letters for you, do a Google search for Kriya Yoga Canada. Kriya Yoga Canada. Kriya Yoga Canada. Satchidananda's website pops up.
Or simply Babaji, BABAJI.ca.
Even better. That's how simple is that. Okay. Now, as white light passes through a prism, it gets diffracted into all the colors of the rainbow. As consciousness enters the physical plane of existence, it manifests into many different forms, one of which is prana, which is an intelligent, conscious energy, which informs and maintains and regulates the autonomic processes of the human body. So this all from the Siddhanta philosophical point of view. So therefore, it would be prudent, don't you think, to do everything that you can in order to open the channels in the body through which the prana can flow to help support and promote the structure and function of the human body. So how does one go about doing that, Satchidananda?
Yeah, the main thing is really to get your mind out of the way. We're using the mind, of course, to communicate, but it's the mind which creates the appearance or the delusion that there's really more, that there's actually not just oneness. There is, in fact, a one being, a one consciousness, which is in everything and within everything. And what's actually happening is that the mind starts to divide. It starts to make distinctions between prana and consciousness, between high and low, good and bad. And these are just artificial creations. So probably the best thing I could tell the listeners would be find a way to quiet your mind, whether it's through yoga or meditation or relaxation exercises. And every day, enter into a state which is as calm as you can be. And in that state, a certain amount of silence will start to creep into your mind. And it's during this silence that there's a healing that takes place. The prana starts to flow where it should flow. And you also get certain insights. You might say, certain messages from this higher intelligence that's within you. And it will guide you. It will tell you, maybe you should change this about your life. Maybe you should let go of that. Maybe it'll give you some wisdom or some practical advice.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're hearing it right from the horse's mouth. The practice of yoga has been dear to my heart for a long, long, long time. And again, you would be hard-pressed to find someone who is more knowledgeable, both from an intellectual point of view and a personal point of view, than my guest this afternoon, Marshall Govindan, a.k.a. Satchidananda. His website, again, babaji.ca. That's babaji.ca. Lots of information there that you can access if you feel so inclined, because remember, our entire position is you don't know what you don't know. And especially when it comes to your health and well-being, there's a ton of stuff in that domain that you would benefit greatly from by learning about, experiencing, and accessing. I started transcendental meditation to the horror of my parents when I was 11 years old, and it's been one of the best things I've ever done. Securing a meditative practice in your life, I think, is one of the most important things you can do, in addition, of course, to eliminating the 10 bad foods and taking the 90 essential nutrients. Satchidananda, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Quite frankly, it's been too long.
Thanks for the opportunity to share.
My pleasure indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a great big Fire Your MD now. A round of applause. Satchidananda, the stuff that this man has done in his life, even just the pragmatic stuff with this research stuff that they're doing in southern India, or translating palm leaf manuscripts that are some 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 years old. Unbelievable. Check it out again, babaji.ca, babaji.ca. I'm Dr. Peter Glidden, your steadfast advocate for health. We're switching gears now, taking your phone calls when we come back.